is. We're very pleased to be joined from Newsmax New York by Harvard Law professor and Newsmax contributor Alan Dershowitz. Alan is the author of the brand new book, Electile Dysfunction. I said electile dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. Alan, we appreciate your time here on America Talks Live and arousing interest today. The Senate already voting to override Mr. Obama's veto. And when we see what has happened there, former Bush Attorney General Michael Mukasey supported Obama's decision to veto. Now, listen to his reasoning, and I'll ask for your reaction.
The 9/11 Commission found, contrary to what Mr. Carter said, that there is no evidence that either the Saudi government or any senior Saudi official was involved in 9/11. And it's quite counterintuitive that they would be, because when Osama bin Laden presented the reasons for 9/11, he said principal among them was the presence of United States troops in the Arabian Peninsula who were there at the invitation of the Saudi government.
So there's the former Attorney General Michael Mukasey. Alan, do you agree with what he said?
Well, a trial would determine whether or not what he said was accurate. There would be discovery. Mike Mukasey is a terrific guy and was a great attorney general. And I think in the end, he's probably right that the president was correct on this one, that the risks of other countries adopting this approach and holding Americans into court are probably too great. It's a close question. It's a close question. Part of me is thrilled that the president had a veto overridden, because this basically sends the president an interesting message that he ought to have known a long time ago. You know, we really do have a system of checks and balances, and the president doesn't rule without the Senate, without Congress. The president sometimes thinks that he doesn't need the Senate or the Congress, as he did during the Iran deal, when he prevented the Senate from even voting on what essentially was a treaty. So it serves the president right to have his veto overturned by Congress. But in the end, I think Obama may have the better of the argument on the merits of this legislation, though it's close, and I'm sympathetic with the victims of 9/11, but probably having a trial of a country is not good for international comity or international relations.
Alan, there is something that has happened at the world body not far from where you were sitting, the United Nations. Now, granted, this comes out of a committee that is Geneva-based, specifically the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. That committee says that past history in the U.S., specifically slavery, is enough to justify reparations, saying the impact of slavery continues to be seen in the African American community. Reparations. What the heck is the UN doing trying to butt into sovereign American law and, well, history for that matter?
Well, I think we all would be well advised to just turn off the TV whenever the UN comes on. We should be not listening to anything they say about America, about morality. This is an organization that would not condemn current slavery if it were being conducted by countries that are favored by the UN. It applies such a double standard to Western nations, to the United States, to Israel, than it does to Saudi Arabia, which still essentially has forms of slavery, many other countries in many parts of the world that have apartheid, gender apartheid, and religious apartheid. So please, UN, stop lecturing the United States. Maybe you can learn a lesson from the imperfect democracy that we have in this country and export it to some of the perfect tyrannies that have so much power in the United Nations these days. So, you know, I think we should ignore what the United Nations said. The United Nations UNESCO has now decided that Christians and Jews don't have any history in the Middle East. They've decided to change the names of all the Christian and Jewish cultural spots in the Middle East and give them only Arabic names, trying to erase the history of Christianity.
Well, then if that's
Judaism,
the case, you know what,
in the birthplace of both of those religions.
What we should do is something I advocated during my days in Congress. Perhaps the UN should be invited out of New York, and I don't know, maybe Khartoum in the Sudan would be the perfect new headquarters for the UN without American help. But that's another topic for another day, Alan. Let me turn to to what is transpiring in a military court today. Bo Bergdahl back in court at Fort Bragg, facing a court-martial on charges of desertion and misbehavior before the enemy after walking off of his post in Afghanistan in 2009. If convicted, he could face life in a military prison. But, Alan, I've gotten calls from some outraged viewers saying, why in the heck was the death penalty taken off the table for a guy like Bo Bergdahl?
Well, we don't execute people anymore in this country for desertion. The last time we did it was, Private Slovak in the Second World War. It's an anachronism. This poor kid was over his head. The pressures that operate on people in combat, he should be punished. We shouldn't in any way encourage the kind of desertion, putting American lives at risk, trying to bring him back. But I think we have to have a calibrated punishment that not only fits the crime, but fits the criminal. And the death penalty certainly doesn't fit this crime.
All right, well, I will try to be diplomatic, but I just got to tell you, the whole thing with him and the curious Rose Garden ceremony with his parents, where his dad in full beard speaks in Urdu, as if they have a welcome wagon for the enemies of this country. It was a little bit nuts. You got to admit that. It's more than just a troubled and confused kid.
But I don't blame a father for doing everything possible to bring back his son.
Including a crash course in Urdu to salute our enemies. Yeah,
well,
okay.
I would,
all right.
Let me tell you, I would take a crash course in Urdu for my children.
I love my kids too, but I think that's absurd in terms of the world stage. Now, on the world stage, we note the passing of former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, and of course the Clintons are heading there. The Clinton campaign has yet to confirm that Hillary will be there, but of course Bill, as a former president, will be there. Obviously, it's something that you want to have a memorial to former Prime Minister Peres. It doesn't hurt Hillary here at home politically, though, does it?
Well, I think she really loved, and Bill Clinton really loved Shimon Peres, as I did. He was a very close friend of mine. I met him first in 1970 when he was arming Israel and helping it to defend itself against the countries surrounding it, which wanted to destroy it. I most recently spent time with him when he was given the Medal of Freedom by President Obama at a White House ceremony. I'm wearing a black tie to show my personal great grief over his death. Every time I went to Israel, I paid my respects to him when he was the president. He was a wonderful man, a man for all seasons. He knew when to make war, and he knew when to try to achieve peace. So I don't think we should talk about politics in the context of his passing. He was the last of the founding generation of Israel, very close to David Ben-Gurion, and I think not only one of the greatest Israelis and Jews of the 20th and first part of the 20th century, but one of the greatest people in the world during that period of time, and he will long be remembered. But like Moses, he was not given an opportunity to get to the promised land. He wanted peace. He wanted to be the person who brought about the two-state solution, and he did not live long enough to see it. But I hope in his memory we will achieve a two-state solution with Israel's security protected.
Well, two states at odds in recent years, sadly, the United States and Israel, and there's no way to divorce politics from current Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to New York last week to address the UN. Both major presidential candidates visited with him. A lot of people taking note of the Trump visit with Netanyahu. What do you think was discussed there? Got about 45 seconds.
Well, I know what was discussed there because I had dinner with Benjamin Netanyahu and Sarah Netanyahu during their visit here. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to be as balanced, as fair, and didn't want to in any way take sides. He met with both of them. He expressed the interest of the United States in enforcing the Iran deal to the hilt, explained why it would be a terrible thing for the UN to pass a resolution encouraging the Palestinians not to negotiate, because the road, as he said at the UN, the road to peace is through Ramallah or Jerusalem and not through New York, and certainly not through the United Nations.
Well, we thank you for stopping on one of New York's busy boulevards to visit us from Newsmax New York. Alan Dershowitz, thanks so much for your time. And we'll have more of America Talks Live right after this.